So, who are you and what do you do?
I am Renee Warren with an accent aigu. You would appreciate
Yeah,
this.
no one else is going to catch that one. You're
No.
going to have to explain it as you walk through this.
I'm the founder of a company called We Wild Women, and we work with mostly female entrepreneurs, helping them get the media coverage they deserve. I have a podcast in the top 1% in the world called Into the Wild, and the author of a book called Get Covered: How to Craft, Pitch, and Tell Your Startup Story to Get More Customers.
I feel like I've known you and Dan like forever. We've talked about this before. It's like we were
I've
both
known
all there
you,
at the beginning, and then we
yeah,
both Canadian, and we kind of see each other on planes and stuff. So I'm glad we're getting a chance to actually talk about the things we do.
yeah. I feel like I've known you longer than I've known Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't tell him about the kids that we have. Yeah,
I know,
it's
right? Yeah.
very shocking to him.
But my best memory of you is actually, and I talked about this, I think the last time we spoke, was that you spoke on stage. You did a talk, and I can't. It was like one of those fancy like art places in Toronto. It's like an old, I don't
Okay.
know. I want to say church, but it's not. You're the first person I ever saw present without using text on slides.
Oh,
It was
right.
just
Sure.
pictures, and it was the most fascinating thing. This was probably like 2007 or 2008.
Yeah, I'd love
Was.
to say that was mine. I stole that as a hybrid from both Tom Peters and Seth Godin when I saw them presenting. But as you know, in the business, it's really funny because people will say, "Well, can you send us your slides in advance?" And I'm like, "Sure." It's like a picture of an elephant. It's a
Yeah,
picture
yeah,
of
yeah.
like, what's he going to do? And I'm like, it's kind of like asking a musician, "Can you send me a picture of your guitar before we see you play?" I'm like, I don't know if
Right.
it's all that material to what I'm going to say on stage. But you're right. It came from a time when it was just heavy bullet point slides, and I was like, I can't do that for
No,
sure.
it was probably the most interesting presentation, even still to date, because it broke a pattern of what it was like to attend an event and listen to speakers. Because usually there was like bullet points and so much text, and you're hovering between reading what's on the slide and listening to the speaker. And that's not the point. You're supposed to
No.
be listening to who is speaking on stage. So I thank you for that.
Oh, it's great. I'm glad to hear. And hopefully you pass that on when you're doing media training too, because
Seriously.
unfortunately we're still littered with terrible presentations in
I
our
know.
world, which
I
is
know.
brutal. One of the places I thought we should start is gender, because hey, let's get into it right away. You've done a lot of focusing on women.
Yeah.
I've spoken a lot about it. And like for me, one of the interesting aspects of it was I really felt that the COVID pandemic was a moment where we would see a bit more equalization in terms of gender pay gap, in terms of women funded startups, in terms of people getting more attention. There was the whole DEI movement. We had all of these amazing things that happened in time. And then you come back to the real world, we kind of go back to work. And none of those things really came to fruition. The
Mhm.
challenge that we had before, we're seeing definite advancements. There's no doubt about that. But this idea of show us your receipts and where things are at, it still
Mhm.
feels like we should have done a lot more during that time to this period of time. And I was just curious, one is what were your thoughts on that? And also, I guess less optimistically, I wonder if we couldn't do it then, how are we ever going to do it now?
I think like anything, it takes time. So, kind of like, I'm going to use a marriage as an example. If, say, someone's having a rocky marriage and they keep externalizing what's going on in their marriage on somebody else, then the issue isn't actually the other person, it's internal. And so, the point of this is that I think what needs to really happen is like the women are already shaken up and they're ready to take their stake, put that flag on the top of the mountain. The more needs to come from men. And it's not to say that we aren't doing enough. We get comfortable living in a patriarchy. Even women do, because we don't know it any differently. We don't actually become curious about why things are the way they are. We don't ask questions. We don't ask for changes. Now it's very slow. It is changing. I actually heard of some corporations in the US that are now offering menopause leave, because women have been silenced about what's going on in their body, and it can be extreme. Some women get it so bad to the point where they can't function, yet they're still mandated at work. And so now that we're starting to understand that women are more complex
Yeah, it's just funny that I'm
physiologically,
thinking the fact that they don't have maternity leave, but they're talking about this is
right?
another
There,
crazy
there you go.
statement.
Well,
Yeah.
and then there's the maternity leave thing too. When we get more women in positions of power, more women in CEOs, more women in politics, I think there'll be bigger changes. It's just that that equality isn't there yet. Because even looking at bathroom design, I actually was reading a study about this. In Disney, where the failure was to actually make the design for women bathrooms, they made it the same size as the men's bathroom.
Yeah, this is the craziest thing for me always. Whenever you're at a show or at an event, the
Yes.
women's bathroom is lined out the door. It's crazy.
Right. And then the default is also for women to be the one that care for the children. They change the diapers. Like those facilities aren't very good. Even Disney, with all
I agree.
respect to them, they don't have it right.
No.
It's because all of the designs for these theme parks, for all the big buildings, pretty much anywhere you walk into, were designed by men. And so they just said, oh, let's just carbon copy these bathrooms for women and maybe put a little extra thing that they need in there.
So then I think about the tools that you and I use and the success that we've had in terms of you now can have a business from anywhere. You now can, with very limited money, build a full out content creation place. You can use a platform like Shopify and start selling online. We have platforms like Etsy and eBay. Again, I would have thought intuitively that that's a grand equalizer as well. And yet again, I'm looking at this going, there's like a lot of room for improvement here.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is something in that gap? I'm curious about your thoughts on it because you've been really successful at it. Many people have. And I'm wondering why that also is also the struggle, because that's not something that entails any form of patriarchy or anything like that. Anybody can decide I'm going to create a text, an article, a podcast, whatever it might be. How do you see that side of it? I mean, I feel there's more equity there, a little bit more, but
I actually see tons of more women starting businesses and leveraging those platforms. I mean, look at Canva. Isn't Canva founded by a woman?
Yeah.
One of the most successful tech companies of our decade. So I don't know. I see more of this happening. I see more women starting businesses. Yes, the percent of men versus women who get funding and who start businesses, there's still a big disparity there. But we're getting traction. It's just that things have to change at the decision level in order for this to actually trickle down. So we need more women.
That's where I was curious, because when there is no decision structure and anybody can do it, I would think the floodgates would open in a different dynamic, but the numbers, just overall, like entrepreneurship numbers are actually down. I think there was like 100,000 less entrepreneurs. And I look at these numbers and I'm always stumped by how are we still at this place?
So is this because of the pandemic?
Just recently saw, I think it was in Canada specifically. I think we're like short 100,000 entrepreneurs. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's because everything's becoming more expensive.
We can't afford it
anymore. And there's less security. Even we think that becoming an entrepreneur is the most secure decision, or getting a job is the most secure. Nothing is safe. You can lose your job at the drop of a dime, and then your business can be closed down. So it's just a scary time that we're living in. And the barrier to entry and starting a business is so much more affordable now than it's ever been. Like you said, you can just start a Shopify store and start knitting hats, and you can be successful.
Yeah. I mean, I think the correlation there is more like, just because it's easier to do, more people are doing it, doesn't mean that they're equipped to do it well.
And there's that.
That's a big factor too.
That is a huge factor, because most businesses don't survive past a year. Because the platforms are so easy to use, intuitive, affordable, we think if we just have a great thing and we put it on a Shopify store, then we'll be successful.
Yeah.
When we start going in the right is when we realize, oh, geez, I actually need to know how to run a business.
Yeah.
And this is the difference between an artist and an entrepreneur. Because artists tend to not know how to run a business because they're just so in flow with the work that they do. And artistry is beyond like painting a canvas and singing a song. I'm talking about accountants, lawyers, doctors. They're all artists in their own right because they're doing the thing that they're passionate about. Most people don't know how to run the business.
Yeah, I believe there's a bifurcation in entrepreneurship. And I think that bifurcation is self-employment versus entrepreneurship. And I think self-employment is a really good option for a lot of people. I can run a very tight, small, even solopreneur business that I'm making as much or equal to, or maybe even a little less than I would an organization, but I have much more flexibility and choice, and it's not a heavy lift business that I have to run or grow.
Yeah.
Versus entrepreneurship, I believe, has a vision towards something within the industry that you're serving that doesn't already exist, some nuance on that. And I like seeing that. I like seeing this varied state of entrepreneurship, these different levels of it.
Yeah, and the distinguishing factor for me in that is this self-employed would be me doing PR with hardly any other help, just me doing the pitching for a handful of clients.
Right.
The difference is what I'm doing is that I'm building out an agency. So while I'm
Very
still
different.
doing some of that work, now I have a team that does that so that I can grow the business.
So
There's
let's
difference.
talk about public relations and building
Oh,
platforms. It's a topic
okay.
that's near and dear to my heart. It's a topic that I've worked in. I've been a part of it. I still consider myself part of that ecosystem in one way, shape, or form. Let's start with just your general thoughts on what's happening with PR, what's happening with PR agencies. We can traipse into AI after that because it's going to be a massive disruption for that industry for sure. But just a general state of things, how are you feeling about it in a world where there's so much content?
Oh, well,
Everybody's creating content, everybody is content.
well, here's the thing. Most people get, I think 64% of American adults get their news from social media. And so we think about where we used to get our news. We would watch the television or turn on the radio. And now everybody has the means to be their own media company. And that's what we do. We share our opinions, we take live video of the stuff that's happening around us. The state of the industry has shifted so much, and especially the last 4 or 5 years. A lot of the big publications have laid off all their staff writers. Now the editors are gone too. So where I used to have all these relationships, now it doesn't exist. And what I heard too, so we actually have somebody that works with us who is a former editor of a big publication, and she's now doing the pitching. Interesting turn of events.
Yeah.
That's an
Like,
example.
let me do all the things I hated receiving for my entire
Exactly.
career.
Which I'm like, this is great because your pitches are amazing. But also, we have a notable journalist on retainer with us to help us not only glean insight of what's happening within the industry, but to mark up some of our pitches and just give us some feedback. But what's happening now, and especially AI, so thanks for bringing that in, is that because we can use artificial intelligence to write content, to edit content, there's less human touch needed. And it's getting so good now with people inserting prompts into even Chat GPT that you can remove the element of it looking like it was written by AI. I was lying in bed last night and I know how to write prompts. We actually have a whole library of prompts in our Asana that our team uses. And as before bed, I was like struggling on a pitch for a client, and I just put in all the prompts, bloop, and it pumped out a perfectly tight, amazing pitch. It took me 2 seconds. And so emailed that to myself, threw it in an email this morning, did 10 minutes worth of work to jazz it up, to customize it, and I sent it out, which is great for me. Makes my
Terrible
job
for everybody who
easier.
works for you.
But here's the thing is if you're not leveraging this tool, if you're denying the fact that it can be helpful, then you're going to lose.
Yeah.
But I'm also, it's not lost on me too that it could eventually take over what I'm doing. 100% it could.
So we'll stay on this track. Let's stay on this track. So
Yeah.
I have this debate with a lot of people, and I have this conversation with a lot of people, and I would never consider myself an expert on the topic yet because it's so new, but I'm super using it all the time, using it in every aspect of my content creation, my business ideation, my strategy. I basically have conceded that right now it is one of my partners in business. Like I treat it that way. And I've built out the systems so that each bot is really customized per different utility and tool that I'm doing. And my general answer to people who say, it's not that great, or it can never replace humans, or it's not creative is, I think you are very much not understanding what this tool is. I actually think it's excellent. And
Totally.
it could be excellent today and even better. I don't want to use the word tomorrow because I think we use the tomorrow as if it's social media will be important tomorrow. I think this is a cliff. I think we're at a cliff and people don't realize that this cliff has no bottom attached to it. So when I'm using it, I already see it replacing a lot of people, and I see it replacing a lot of things that would take up an excessive amount of time in terms of how my creativity and my strategy thinks about what I'm trying to create. How do you talk to your team members? How do you talk to clients about it? Because I do feel that people still have this mindset of, it's like, I think humans are going to be very surprised very quickly how simple our brains are because of this stuff.
Yeah. So my team, I train them on it. They ask me a question and I say, have you tried Chat GPT? They're like, oh, this is what it said. It's perfect. My clients, I tell them from the very beginning, before we even sign an agreement, we leverage AI to help to help the creativity component of what we do, to help inspire us, but it's not the thing that we rely on. And they'll rebuttal and say, that's great, but what are we paying you for? And I
It'll
go,
work.
here's what it allows me to do. It allows me to create great content. First of all, 12 years of PR experience. I know what a great pitch looks like. And you can put everything you want into ChatGPT, but if you still don't have that experience, you don't know what's good. But it allows us to pitch more volume. Because before you were stuck on spending 2 hours writing a pitch after already studying your client and all the things. Now ChatGPT cuts that time down by like 75%. So it allows us to pitch more and to do more research and to come up with new angles. So in hindsight, it's actually a beautiful gift.
There are two aspects to it that I think the opposition would take, which I don't, is you're seeing more and more people put human content only on their posts and on their articles, that it wasn't used. You are hearing some people, I think wrongly, make these assumptions that if you create it using these generative AI tools, that Google will penalize you and others will. I think that that's true. If you just ask it, write an article about the 12 best ways to do email marketing, you're probably going to get faulted. But I don't see any of my content in terms of how I use it being flagged at all. What are your reactions to this idea that the tech will almost battle the tech? Like this will be a thing where Google will be able to tell it's been analyzed or created in some way, that they will.
Well, I know there's some words that I've never really seen published before until ChatGPT came out to the masses. One word in particular is the word underscore.
Oh, so I have the word delve. We're going to delve.
Yes, and delve. Delve and underscore. I think Google's a genius. They're going to know based on maybe the frequency of the type of content you put out. Even on social, we have personalities. And so I use words that most people don't use in my social. Yes, I use ChatGPT for inspiration. But I think what happens is you'll get penalized if you don't actually effectively do anything to turn that content into your own.
Yeah. What are you thinking in terms of beyond text? So recently, Sora would be an example of this, that it didn't take me long to do a lot of thought experiments around Sora and thinking about even things like what used to be a static picture on a slide can now be a very cool video if I wanted to do that. It was things like B-roll. I don't really need to then spend 2 weeks on site at the client doing B-roll for some corporate video. This could easily probably create not only a theme, but a style towards it. I use it in all of my audio video stuff, from it doing show notes to using it for transcriptions and beyond. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing beyond text, because I think most people get stuck on ChatGPT and they don't realize that when it comes to communications, it's the 4-pronged approach, and it's doing all really 100%. Well now. Text, images, audio, video, really well.
Easy. I had it do, like, you can buy extra plugins, and I had it create an inspiration for my new podcast cover. It's not what we went with. We actually did our own. But we are using it, and most people don't even know. So right now we're recording on a certain platform that once we're done, when it's done processing, you can go in and you can create videograms from it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You press a button, and what it does is it creates 3 videograms.
I'll tell you the coolest thing, Riverside, which is what we're using to record, does awesome at the end. Once it's done the transcription, you can hit generate show notes, and it's perfect. I mean, it's perfect. To the point where when I watch it, I use that as my guide for where I'm going to grab my social clips from it. I can't even tell you how, if I outsourced this on Fiverr or gave it to a junior, it would never even come back this good.
No.
The summary, the highlights, the transcriptions, the key phrases, keywords for the blog post. That was one of the moments I had where when I clicked that button, I thought, like, we are quickly replacing, and I feel it. I feel the empathy of young people coming into this industry. I don't know how they're going to survive, because my other thought is, for every prompt that we're talking about and telling our team to go use it, it's going to alleviate that need very soon too. Right?
Oh, totally.
I see in how I use my prompt setup that very quickly it's going to not need those.
Nope. Another thing too, where I noticed AI was working in the background, was your Loom videos. So Loom is like screen recording. Yeah. Before, it would just automatically title the video based on the date. And now it generates probably 85% of the time the perfect title.
Yeah, it's so crazy.
It started one day, it blew my mind. I said, So there's a lot of tools, technologies that we use today where this stuff is already happening in the background. We don't even know.
Yeah.
It makes our life easier. But so here's my question to you then. If AI is saving us time, then what are we doing with that extra time?
Look, we know that historically, through any introduction of major technology, whether it's steam, the internet, computers, that it doesn't move time in that way. It doesn't move us to a place where we can have the 4-day work week. The pandemic actually did more for transference of time and energy against work than any technology has before. I don't think it's a question of time. I'm more worried about what happens in a world where it's not a question of time. It's really a question of, I just don't need that resource anymore, or it's acting as that agent. And that's concerning for me because I think optimistically, we will get through this and we'll have a better place to be. The worry is always what happens between now and that time. Because if that's 4 or 5 years of a sudden dip in unemployment into the high 20s, let's say, that's a festering ground for extremism. And if you zoom out and think about our world right now, it's probably the last thing we really need. So my worry about it and my thought about time is less about that. I'm worried that it would just become a worse festering ground for extremism. And as we know, when you have more time to do other things, what might you put attention to? It typically will create new opportunities and new things for people to do new types of work. I'm hopeful for that. But the digital divide between those who can access it and those who can't might be greater only because compute is the biggest problem we have now. How fast and how much access can we get? That's going to probably be some type of commodity. I don't think it'll be accessible by all.
Yeah.
And it's very weird. Like, you're very involved in the startup ecosystem, as am I. Just watching AI. So there's a lot of investment being put into it. All you have to do is put AI into your deck and you'll probably do okay. The problem is that the people really controlling it is already big tech, the ones who already are massive. So even if you come up with something unique, your ability to scale it and get the compute you need versus being taken over by it. So I get really worried about that than I am about like what will we do with the free time. Like the free time I think is so negligible against you don't want your government dumping $2 billion into an industry that might just be feeding more power and money to the big four. Like, that's scary.
Yeah.
And
yeah. I look at it as time in terms of investing back into your business.
Oh, well, let's hope so. But do people do that? I mean, that's the big, right? I mean, Dan's book, Buy Back Your Time, is just an incredible book. I'm not saying that because we're here. I'm saying that because I really mean it. It was a book that hopefully lets people really see what entrepreneurship and time is. Time is your only non-renewable tool that you have. What you do with that time, you guys have been very good at creating that what you would call the integrated life, what I would call the squiggly. My ability to pick up after this and just hang out or go pick up my kids. My ability to build a life that's sustainable for me financially, but also affords me the flexibility to control my time, which is essentially my calendar. But I don't know how people are with this. I wonder if they're just programmed into their setup and they don't even have the ability to understand it if they had it.
Right. I'm also curious about what jobs will become available because of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the complex one.
Yeah.
Because if we think logically that, okay, we have AI, but we also have the Internet of Things, and we also have blockchain. And if you just think about, those are heavy texts, and we're not going to get into it, but this idea that this is a moment where all of them will scale and be connected. So you could say to yourself, oh, like a Tesla robot looks so ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. But when the robots are building the robots, which is essentially happening, it's time to start waking up a little bit. And again, I'm not being an extreme. I'm just saying that this is the reality of it. So we could say, trades would be very important, having people who'd be great plumbers or, painters. You could argue about art and AI for sure, just being good at trades. Excellent. But how long before robots would just be that much more efficient at unclogging a toilet? Like, we don't know.
Right. And getting to the point where that it's just creating its own new startups.
Yeah. Best case scenario is Star Trek. I mean, really, it's like if you think about it, it's everybody gets to choose the work that's important to them, be it a farmer, winemaker, interstellar leader of an enterprise. But you're working because it's who you are, not what you have to do.
Yes, your identity.
That would be lovely. But again, with so much divisive politics that people would see that as communism. They would see it as Marxism. They wouldn't necessarily embrace it as a new system to live. I think we're going to have unfortunately, some really tumultuous times ahead of us, which
Well,
is
we're already
crazy.
seeing it,
Yeah,
especially
for sure.
in
It's already
the
brutal. Yeah.
world of PR.
Yeah.
It's like my job and what I do is seemingly becomes easier. I look at the pitches that we wrote back in 2012, 2013, which took a lot of time. And arguably, we got more wins back then because there
Yes.
was less competition. And now everyone's on a podcast tour, everyone's pitching the media because it's become such an easier task to do. I teach people how to do it for themselves as part of one of my programs because I believe everybody should be doing it. It should be integrated into your daily or weekly marketing initiatives.
What does that look like, Renee? Help somebody understand at a basic level, what does that look like if I were to take control of that? Like, what is your expectation of someone?
Yeah. So, like, to do it for yourself?
Yeah.
Say? Yeah. So, I always say you would be creating the strategy. So, really understanding what it is you're trying to achieve and where online this is important for you to have a voice podcast, publications, wherever. Then you write your pitch angles around that. So, you create the storyline and then you do the outreach. So, that first part takes a lot of brain power. ChatGPT can help. But when it comes to actual pitching, that's something that technology can't do. You still need to input that information. There are tools out there. There are very expensive tools out there that you can do this in where you can pitch and follow up and you can see if emails were open and what happened. But I always say if you can do about 5 to 10 touch points a week to podcast hosts or the media consistently over the course of 90 days, that you'll start to see the momentum and the results. Because that's how long it takes. I had a gentleman yesterday. So I did the podcast tour for my husband's book launch. I had a gentleman yesterday reply to a pitch that I did.
That's why he was on my show. You pitched me. I couldn't say no.
I did. But this gentleman, I pitched in November of 2022. And he got back to me now. Now, there's a couple of factors in this. One being that they probably were sitting, they didn't know who this Dan guy was. They were probably sitting back and waiting to see how successful the book was. There's a lot of publications and podcast hosts that did that. But the fact that it can take that long is not lost on me, and it's also not lost on my clients. I've had half-page print publications come out with a client that they never told me it was happening, and it was 9 months after our engagement stopped. And all of a sudden, a friend said, "Hey, look at your client is in a half-page spread of Women's Day." It's like, wow, when did this happen? So it takes time, and not to discourage people. I'm just setting expectations.
So let's stop there. We'll go through each step or other steps. One is, who do I know that I can pitch this to? Meaning I'm a nobody. I'm talking about myself. I'm sending this to a publication, whether it's a podcast or an online. They don't know who I am. I have no street cred. I don't have. How am I supposed to talk to them to create something compelling? Do I avoid myself and just speak to a really compelling topic? How do you advise that? And why go that route versus why don't you just create a voice for yourself?
Well, I think you need both.
Okay.
They complement each other. So the more, it's pretty obvious, the more notable you are online by way of social media or a thought leader, the easier it is to land media coverage because you've already positioned yourself as the expert. And the best way to do that today is to take advantage of a social media platform that works well with you, that you feel good about, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, you name it, and to just own it. Share your knowledge and position yourself as that authority in the industry. Because by default, people will start coming to you. But it's also like your social resume. It's that proof that you know what you're talking about, you're passionate about this one particular topic. So then when you go to pitch, you can say, hey, here's my social, and you can look in. But it also gives you that leverage to say, here's the thing that I talk about that I'm passionate about, that I know. Like, a lot of people are really good at what they do. They're incredible speakers. They're amazing podcast guests. They don't have that social presence. I had a client who doesn't even have, barely has LinkedIn, and yet was able to get on some top publications because of what he's accomplished in his life. So you can still be somewhat silent and still have that success.
I'm curious about what you're saying in relation to how we've changed so much. I remember in the early 2000s, for me to do anything search optimized or on LinkedIn, pretty easy. I mean, you could do
Yeah.
it. There wasn't a lot. Now, even big brains, people with followings, I can see because owning Thinkers One and having access to a lot of
Hmm.
interesting web analytics, that the amount of attention noise that they get has been muted. It's really
Totally.
hard to get attention now. So, is it a thing where we're just spitting in the wind and an access social proof if someone lands on it, or do you think people can still really break through? I think in podcasting we've seen it because newer shows like Lex Friedman and Chris Williamson have been extremely successful with that. But I think about social media, and if I ever get serious, I'll be like, oh, let me try X again and go back to that where I have a large following, and it just seems so hard to build traction on it.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I was actually going back to look at really old Instagram posts, really old being from like last year.
Yeah,
And my engagement was so much higher. And arguably the content I'm sharing now is so much better.
better. This is my problem. Yeah,
So I'm like, it's an algorithm thing for sure. It's a platform thing. So that's an indication that, hey, maybe we should try something else too. Meaning you have to go off platform, like to something else, YouTube. Um, PR is a huge complement to all of this. So I look at PR as the umbrella. It's like the mother of all marketing because it's really about building relationships. Also, the thing that extends your reach. So like I talk about this thing called the authority arc, and there's 3 R's in the authority arc. You start off with identifying how you're rare, creating a reputation, and then extending your reach. And so to extend your reach, to amplify your message is really about doing a few things really well, but you have to diversify how you're putting yourself out there. Getting on stages, going on a podcast tour, doing social media. It's becoming busier. It is. However, we've talked about AI being a platform that can help us get our time back. And so I think if people just put all their eggs in one basket, then they're losing. Especially, I hear these horror stories of people just losing their accounts or somebody going in and hacking their account. Because if you rely on that one place, then you can't be successful. So I notice, like I go to my analytics, I notice every time I get a spike in followers and engagement, it's because I spoke on a summit, or there was a notable podcast that I was on that was shared, or I was on a stage. It's because of different things that I do.
yeah. But do you find, I still would argue that it's really noisy. I mean, you have people who are claiming to be, keynote speakers now, and everyone's the best podcaster, and everyone's done TEDx, and it does feel like a lot. It does
It
feel
does.
like everybody is simply marketing to everybody versus I'm really creating value. Even in the crux of the content, you see a lot of people who will just quote themselves and these things that aren't really quotable. They're just words,
Yeah.
sentences. I don't know if that's a quote. You see people promoting the outcome of it. I was on this stage or this versus what got them to that stage. This is a valuable to you as someone. I'm very sensitive to this. I guess it comes from my publishing and journalism days where I want to make sure I'm not self-promoting, but if they're going to stop the scroll for anything,
Yeah.
I want it to be that it's adding value to their business and their lives and how they think versus I'm on another plane. I'm speaking to somewhere else. I'm doing this. I've become very anti that type of marketing.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. Going back to what I said about the authority arc is really identifying how you're rare, how you're unlike anybody else, how you're unforgettable. Because people do business with those they know, like, and trust. And so when you're putting yourself out there, how are you different? Sure, I'm a PR expert, but how am I different? How am I different is how we approach PR, who we work with, our methods.
Yeah.
We're very distinguished that way. And then also going back to that diversification, but one thing that I'm noticing, especially to cut through the noise, is something I genuinely believe in is I believe that in order to be successful, you need to be slightly controversial.
Yeah.
And that means that you have to have the confidence to share a belief that might go against the grain. And we all have those beliefs. Even today, I shared a story and it was just about confidence, but it was about me at a photo shoot and I was wearing less clothes than I normally wear. And I'm a very conservative person. And the first comment was about a woman who's like, how do we always connect confidence with being half naked on social media? I'm like where else? So anyways, but it got her commenting. And then it got other people coming in and having a discussion. So it's kind of like it's breaking this pattern of what's happening on my feed. It took me a while to actually feel confident to even share that, knowing that someone's going to come in and say exactly that. And it was the first comment. But so maybe it's a little controversial going online and trying to get attention because I'm in a cute outfit. I get it.
Yeah, but if you expand that out and
Yeah,
you think about providing value, I see in such a hostile world where everything is controversial and it's so easy to be controversial that it makes it hard. Because almost any comment can then be, well, it's easy for you to say because you're a cis male, or that's easy
yeah,
for you to say because you're a successful female, then blah, 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 blah. Like it feels like, and then the politics of it, that whatever slant it is, there seems to be someone declaring you an extreme on one side or the other, which discounts 50% of your potential discernible audience.
totally. But here's
I
the
mean,
thing.
I'll give you a crazy example of this because it happened to me and I was really shocked by it. But in Canada, for those who don't know, because it was all over the news, we had this removal of potentially Google and Facebook from providing news in Canada. And there was a whole thing with the government and they got involved and they were going to tax links. It was a crazy thing. It's still going on, but essentially Facebook said, no, they're not going to play along. Google's still playing along, which is, it is what it is. And I was doing a lot of editorial on this of like, what an absurd, like you can't just break the internet because you want the government wants you to pay for it. And I had a couple of speaking gigs coming up, and one of them was a company that had a lot of government contracts. And they basically asked me to quiet a bit down on that topic.
Oh,
I was shocking because it became political. I wasn't even choosing left, rights. It wasn't, and it really opened my eyes up, not to cancel culture. It wasn't anything like that, but it was just this idea that anything you say, even if it's a bit edgy, can now be taken down too. It can be really damaging.
oh yeah. There's a lot of people that have control over what you're allowed to say. And I think if anything taught us that is the pandemic, because people took sides for their own reasons and then everyone started trying to cancel each other as opposed to just letting them have their opinion. One thing I learned as of late was the idea of, I think the ultimate success in life is actually being able to go through life without being offended. Imagine if
For
the whole
sure.
internet was unoffendable. We'd
Yeah, I
have more
mean,
cheerleaders than anything.
yeah, I mean, look, we are seeing, I call them the public intellectuals. We're seeing this in podcasting on stages. We're seeing people who would traditionally, and I mean traditionally during the pandemic where everybody was being canceled for saying anything,
Yeah.
now being, if you were canceled, telling their story and having that story elevated and having other people with more open, maybe more centered perspectives saying, okay, it wasn't the best way to say it, but we shouldn't be canceling somebody who is that thoughtful, who is saying things that might be contrary to my own political or religious
Mhm,
beliefs.
mhm.
I don't know that we're winning at that. I mean, I think you're right. It's a beautiful statement. And I'm for sure in your camp, Renee. There's no doubt about
Yeah,
it. But it doesn't feel like we're heading down that path. It does
yeah.
feel like beyond this small group of, and I think they're heroic, these people, for how they're talking about even very sensitive political views and global geopolitical views. I look at that and I go, I don't know if I would do that because
Yeah,
that might blow away
exactly.
50% of my speaking business, might blow away 50% of the thinkers who would want to be on the platform or people who want to buy from me. And I don't say that as I should be hiding. I say it as it's very real.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, cancel culture is still strong. And I always look at it like, what a shame it is that you can't speak your truth, which could be an important conversation for some people because you feel like you're going to lose these contracts. I feel like during the pandemic, I had opinion that went against the powers that be.
I remember.
I was so worried that they would take my account away. And so I had to stop talking about it and then even went from DMs to text messages. So the meta cannot be aware of the fact that maybe I don't agree with them on certain things. It was so scary thinking, yep, they could.
Yeah, and it's the stuff it's the things you don't know that you don't know, which is
Yeah.
how many potential business leads came across it and just thought that's not where I want. I'd rather deal with someone who isn't saying anything that's even remotely risky.
Well, and it goes back to doing business with people that share similar values. But it's almost too far gone. Like, can't you just
Yeah.
still do business together and disagree on things?
Yeah, yeah. I'm also thinking back in the day when Chick-fil-A started with all their LGBTQ issues. not being open on Sundays because their religious views.
Yeah.
There was like a Howard Stern segment, and they were talking about it. And he just flippantly, it was like a news segment. So he flippantly came in and said something like, just why don't they just shut up and sell chicken? And I laughed at it, but it's crazy to if you would take and transpose that and put that on the internet today, there would be people that would attack Howard Stern.
Oh, yeah.
And there would be from both sides saying, they should be allowed to say and do whatever they want. It's their own business. People saying like, I can't believe people would want to work for a company that, is like that to certain segments of our population. You couldn't even do that anymore. I have friends who have small startups with a handful of employees, and they'll often call me with, my team wants me to make a statement about X, Y, Z. And I don't even have I'm just running this business, but they feel that if we don't say anything, whether it's about the Middle East or whether it's about politicians or
it's performative. Look at the Black Lives Matter movement that happened July 4th of 2020. Yeah. I think there was a lot of beauty that came out of it. And there are some incredibly articulated emails that came from mostly tech startups positioning where they were in the matter. Haven't heard from anybody since about that particular topic. So there's a lot of pressure to say something out of discomfort, but also out of that feeling of needing to just to probably shut some people out. That's the reality.
I mean, this speaks to the world of public relations because it's not just about pitching and getting featured. It's about positioning.
Totally.
Tell me a little bit about what your advice is to somebody who's thinking about, I need to position myself. I'm very concerned that everything that's said online gets taken in 5 different ways.
It does.
What are you doing to navigate that for clients, even for certain businesses and industries in particular, just still getting bombarded with negative repercussions for whatever they do?
Best advice is to ignore it.
Keep going.
Keep going. I mean, unless you're extremist, which I doubt that's the point. It's like I said, in order for you to be successful in life, you have to be controversial. I'm not saying you have to be like pro-choice or not. The point is what you say that it could be super valuable and helpful to people is going to be contradictory to other people. And they're going to say something. And you have to have a thicker backbone today than ever before when you're showing up online. People are mean and they go out of their way to try to cancel you or to make you feel bad about existing.
So talk a bit about this idea of building authority. This was a topic that was very near and dear to my heart. Part of the reason in the early 2000s I started with different slides and different ways of getting the message out was because I could see that there weren't many people doing it. And being a traditional publisher of magazines, having all these tools to be able to do it at my own will without gatekeepers was huge. And if I fast forward to today when we're talking in mid-2024, I think building authority is really hard now. It's really a difficult thing to do because it's either on one side, you've got all these skills that you want to share, just you have the experience. On the other side, you're going against a lot of people in your industry who are performative. They don't necessarily have the skills, but they're like, I should be an influencer. I can be, make money being famous or creating content. What do you think about now when you talk to somebody about truly building authority?
I think it's more needed than ever before. There's also more competition. Like you said, I go back to the days in our world where there was just a handful of people that were the people that talk about marketing, like Seth Godin, you name it. And it's just them on repeat. And then people are learning how to do that for themselves. I think it's a beautiful thing. The problem is, like going back to the authority arc, is you really have to distinguish how you're different. And not try a million different things, a million different stories, a million different messages. It's one thing and doing it really, really well. Steam Whistle Brewery, that was their slogan for the longest time. Do one thing really well because they only had one kind of beer. And that is the motto that we live by in the world of PR too, is you go and do one thing really well, you test it for a little bit, then you try the next angle, the next story. Building authority is baby steps. It takes time. And what does authority even mean? Let's go there.
For sure.
It's about you are the person who sets the standard of their slice of the internet or their slice of the industry. How are you setting the standard? It's the people, you're the person that is the one people trust the most about a certain topic. Right? People ask you to go and speak on their stages because they know you're going to deliver on a certain topic. You've built the authority.
So we're in market, we're doing these things. we're trying to put ourselves out there. You mentioned be a bit controversial, have the edge. What else would you say to people in terms of rising above the noise? One thing I've noticed is you can figure out a model and get there, but the fatigue is really, really quick. And the fatigue is two-sided. One is the creator can fatigue really quickly. They're constantly following their analytics. They feel they become somewhat redundant or trapped in their own, this is what we do. But the fatigue on the consumer side, especially in this world of whether it's TikTok or just short form content, is even more dramatic. How do you think about rising above the noise in that sense?
Yeah. So, what you talk about is the same. How you deliver the content needs to be different. People love to be entertained or educated. There's hardly anything in between. Right? News is entertaining.
Yeah.
So, if you can think of how I can teach about PR in a funny way, or how I can teach about PR where it actually drives people to do the thing themselves or take the action to call me to hire me, we'll do that. But it also means that there's other important things in my life that I need to talk about online too, because I need to establish myself as a human.
Yeah.
Like I'm a mother and a wife. So I think if you go back to reading Dan's book, Buy Back Your Time, he will argue that you need to hire people to help you for this. And if you have an assistant, if you have anybody in your team that has a creative bone in their body, they can help with this content creation and delivery. It shouldn't all be on you because it does become very mundane, boring. You get those moments where you're just not creative anymore. But here's the thing too.
I don't. Some people do.
Some people.
But I make this argument when I used to talk to people about creating content, and my analogy was, you can find somebody who can help. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But if you do have something that you would just do because you love to do it, and for me, I mean, I'm nerdy in that way that I love this. Like I really do love having these conversations, and I don't think I could be as effective in them if I let somebody else do the research. I know that I have to do the research so that when we hit go, we're going to have a really interesting conversation. I hope. I also know that I could outsource the slides, but to me, there's an aesthetic that I like to have. I love to write. So if you told me you're going to write 1,000-word article and no one's going to read it, I would tell you I've done 20,000 of those and I'm fine with it. So the other part of it is, I don't know if people spend any time really thinking about, is there something that they would do if they didn't have to do it? I guess I'm lucky that my hobbies happen to be these things that do help build authority.
Right.
But there are people who have that.
You have to do the work. I have somebody on my team who does my business social media as well as my personal social media. But I'm the one that actually goes on and writes the caption and posts it because I love to do that. And the words and the usage of words can only come from me. And yes, you can train people. I even know the big names out there that would never relinquish control of their accounts because it's them and it's an extension of how they feel, who they are. And that's okay. So the way to keep the process going in creating content on my team, so we have a shared Asana account. My social media girl goes in there and she has a whole column on story prompts based on what she knows about me and the content that's actually doing well. So then I can just open it up. If I'm not inspired, oh, perfect, story prompt, then I can say that. She gaps all my B-roll and she puts videos together for me. And then I write the caption based on what she's put together. It takes 30 minutes of my time. Yeah. I love doing it. I know a lot of people don't. But if you take the whole process of authority building, we'll say putting out content on social as an example, and there's chunks of it you don't like, that's when you get somebody to come in and help. And you do the rest.
So here we sit at a time when it's the content and we need to move it forward. Yeah. Do you have any examples or ways you could talk through what to do when something big happens? I'm thinking about TikTok is a great example. Actually, there's two. TikTok would be a great example of there's a lot of people there. There's not necessarily a lot of content related to business. There's probably an opportunity. There's some coming on. I see opportunities. The other one would be LinkedIn. LinkedIn has become a social network with feeds, and people talk about comment marketing and being the first to comment and creating a lot of that controversy to get it going. Mm-hmm. How do you see that as ways to get to that place where you're doing things differently? Or is it becoming this game where you're chasing all the time. This new thing. Clubhouse would have been another example, but it went
Oh,
away.
I
Yeah.
loved
We
Clubhouse.
all
I
did.
made
That's
so
what we were
many
doing.
friends in those
Yeah.
2 months.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, here's the thing. Back in the day, you could just use Later or some sort of publishing platform and
Yeah.
just take all your content and it goes out across all these things,
Tweet
which is
that.
great. But blah, right? LinkedIn content is different than TikTok, is different than Instagram. There's actually these viral memes going around joking about the different headshots people use for their different social accounts,
Yeah, for sure.
right? It's like professional on LinkedIn, fun on TikTok.
Yeah.
That's just the truth. That's just the nature. You can have you, Mitch Joel, show up on TikTok, and then that version of you versus the person who goes and looks on LinkedIn, it's like a different purpose for going to those platforms. So your content has to have a different purpose too. Knowing that we have different reasons to go to these platforms. For me, for most people, TikTok's to be entertained, not really educated. That's the thing. I've done a lot of business stuff on TikTok. It only worked if it was like super controversial.
Yeah.
Then there's
crazy.
Instagram.
I think it's more like extreme. I call it extreme emotions, like super funny, super emotional,
Totally.
super tearjerker. I think when you're playing in that realm, it works very well on TikTok. So you have to take whatever you're doing and add some type of extreme emotion to it.
Yes. But you also have to like be warned that there's actually a really funny account on TikTok. I forget the name of the account. It's a father and 3 sons, and they run like some sort of insurance company somewhere in the States.
Okay.
And their TikToks have nothing to do with what they do. And they have, I don't know, probably millions of followers. And it's really about this father raising these 3 sons, and they all work for him in the company. And they all do these funny things. It's so entertaining. However, I don't know what they do.
Right.
So that's the problem, is that you're capturing the attention, you're actually entertaining people.
Yeah.
But if the purpose is to convert people to a customer, then the failure is in not creating some content that relates to that. Now they have that opportunity. It doesn't have to be everything. It could be maybe twice a week, but the content has to have a purpose. And that purpose has to have a call to actions, which I call the destination. What is it you're really trying to send these people to? Where are they trying to go?
I know it's a generic question in a sense, because the answer would be it depends on the individual and what they're doing. But I'm paying a lot of attention to platforms. I know you are too. Do you think that there are certain channels right now that are still more effective than others? Let's talk about it in relation to startups or the individuals we're typically circling around with. It does feel like LinkedIn suddenly became this thing.
Yeah.
It does feel like while TikTok is big, that Instagram, suddenly it's okay to be a little more serious on.
Yeah. I think for business, totally Instagram.
Yeah, it's
And
weird.
podcasting. Podcasting in the sense of either really being strategic about going on shows or creating your own podcast.
Yeah.
Which is a warning because it's a lot of work.
Oh my God.
But that's the thing. It's you go to the platform where that information is needed. You can go viral on TikTok, and I've seen this on several accounts where people have gotten millions of views. They've even gotten mentioned in big publications like Scary Mummy and whatnot, and it did nothing for them.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Because the content had nothing to do with their business.
I'm also curious about, this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately, and it is, I guess it's the way media moves and works. For a time in the early 2000s, when blogging first started, there was this real need for it to be an individual and a personal and this idea. And it did morph over time to corporations. You need to have your own corporate blog and your own corporate social places, and people need to be able to have customer service. And it feels a little bit lately like it's going back to the individual, that this ability to have like a corporate TikTok account or your LinkedIn corporate page, even newsletters. If I think about my own appetite, and I have hundreds and hundreds of them, I love newsletters. I'm much more attracted to the individual creating a newsletter than the organization. I'm curious, one, if that's not just me, am I being a market of one, is question one. And question two would be, what's your recommendation if somebody's like, I want it to be from my organization?
Okay, I love this question
Okay.
because the business can't really build that authority unless the people in it are building the authority. They're setting the standard. I don't think social media works unless for big corporations, unless you're really funny, entertaining account, like how Domino's Pizza will go head to head with Burger King
Right.
and stuff like that. That's funny. That if you're any sort of founder or any size business and you have the capacity and the means to be able to go online yourself individually, yes, because people, when they make a purchasing decision, they're purchasing from the team,
Yeah.
especially smaller companies, right? You think about like even email clients, there's so many of them out there. And some of them have incredible functioning, like Active Campaign, a little bit clunky in a sense that there's a lot going on. And then there's like Flowdesk and ConvertKit. I will buy from the company in which I know the founder or I know someone from the team. Isn't that crazy?
It's so true. I'm actually thinking now, like during the pandemic, there was a couple of brands that really came up. One of them would be Ecamm. One of them would be Elgato. They were providing some of the tools for streaming. And it was clear that if the founders were interested in the media, they would do well. But I found others where they really did find influencers or people who are already talking about those types of products and brought them in as FTEs almost.
Mm,
And it does work. I
yeah.
was very surprised to see that be so effective. And now that I'm thinking about even my YouTube subscription feed, when I subscribe to an organization, I'm probably more inclined to click on the video where it's the person's face who I know, and I've seen them be really clever about, you know, how to edit a podcast or the best travel gear, whatever it might be. So yeah, it speaks to, I guess, that. But
Well,
it is curious in a world where if you think about media, I think I come from the magazine world, and I've seen some really big organizations produce what I would call top quality. Like these are publishers and editors they have on their team, like you're doing at your organization. And it's funny how that doesn't pass the sniff test anymore. Like normally it would. You could have a great magazine. You didn't know all the writers, you didn't know who they were, but you trusted the magazine. And now
oh,
it feels like that's really gone away in the past short while.
yeah. Well, think about influencer marketing. Big
Yeah.
corporations now understand this,
Yeah.
exactly what we're talking about, and will hire somebody who has a decent social following to have them talk about their product because it's easier to get through to that community because the followers really enjoy that person. So
Yeah.
if
I mean,
somebody
there's a
you
lot of
admire,
scary stories with that too, but yes, in
well,
general. Yeah.
and there's scary stories
Yeah.
everywhere. But with that, it's like people trust the individual. And then if the individual trusts the product or service, then the people will trust the product or
Yeah.
service.
Totally.
Right? You think about like a plumber or electrician. Most of those times, you get a plumber or electrician that comes through the house based on somebody who's referred them to you.
Totally
Hey,
true.
Joey, do you have a good plumber? Okay, what's his name? Chris. Cool. Give me his contact information. Send him over.
Yeah,
Same
or
thing with
if you made a
influencer
name for
marketing.
yourself through videos and Instagram or YouTube, and you work locally, you'll become the celebrity plumber for sure.
There you go. Yes.
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
Renee, tell me the one thing that made you think differently.
Well, long story or short?
It's a podcast. It can be either.
Yeah. So as of late, I've been going through this spiritual journey. And I used to be an atheist. I was a agnostic, and then I became an atheist for the better part of a year. And when my husband and I got together, we both, as far as I knew, had the same perspective on life. And then one day, we're at a family gathering, and he just says to them, he's like, "Yeah, I'm a Jesus follower." And I'm like, I look at him, wait, we didn't talk about this. And there was a lot of stuff that was happening in Canada with the residential schools and the Indigenous. And
Yeah.
I grew up Catholic, and I said, wow, if that's what being a Catholic means, I'm not religious. And quite frankly, religion is just a bunch of people that murder each other. So I'm going to become an atheist. Little did I know that you can actually separate God and religion. I did not know this. So then I went down this spiritual path, and we started working with different plant medicines and then different people. And we hired a spiritual coach who ended up being the person that really cracked me open and understanding the world of how there's a doctor named Dr. Erin Haskell. She's actually coming on my podcast where she says, we are in this world, but we're not of this world. And that thought, pretty deep, made me go, oh, okay. Maybe there's something that does exist outside this world, that we're living here in this body, but we're not from here. And I started believing that because I didn't for the longest time. Changed everything.
People who believe in the simulation believe the exact same thing, but a different way.
Yeah, that's what my husband says too. I'm like, we're not a simulation.
Yeah.
But then I realized it got me appreciating my own mortality. So, being so afraid of death, not knowing what's on the other side. I'm not 100% confident, but I feel more safe in that, knowing like we all die and we can't just be here to live and then it just ends and nothing happens after that. That changed a lot. It changed how I operate my business, which is interesting. Applying the rules of my husband's book, getting more actual time back in my day. Today, I'm picking my kids up early and we're going up to the mountain the last ski weekend of the year. Right? I wouldn't be able to do that. I would think I'm here. I have to work. I have to make more money. I have to please more people because that's what's expected of me. It's not true. What's expected of me is actually to be loved, show love, give love. And that I show up in my work in a more beautiful way. And I get to hang out with cool people like you because I know that God put us in each other's presence in this moment to have this conversation. That changed everything.
I love that, Renée. That's great. That's really great. So let people know where they can find out more about you, more about We Wild Women, book, podcast, all the good stuff you're doing.
Yeah. So they can go to wewildwomen.com. That's my website. And there's lots of free resources there on PR. I have a top podcast called Into the Wild, and it's for entrepreneurs. And then you can follow me on Instagram, Renée_Warren.
Or we can see these pictures you were talking about or whatever.
Yeah, I might go take it down now. No. Yes, the one.
What was the line that it was felt cute at the time, might remove? What's the line everyone uses? That line where it's like felt cute at the time, but might remove this?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to let it go. We'll see what happens.
Thanks so much.
Everyone will forget about it.
Thanks so much for your time, Renée.
Thanks so much.